Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are coming to you live now from the living room of Cody and Gina in their new home.
We went from having a podcast studio in a bedroom to now the entire downstairs of our home being a podcast studio itself. So it's an upgrade, really.
Yeah, the audio might sound a little bit different to you guys listening at home.
We're working on it. We're getting rugs and cushions for the walls. And
I think post-production will get it.
Don't worry, we'll get it in editing, yeah.
Yeah. But welcome. Welcome to our home. We are happy to show you this hospitality.
Join us.
If we wanted to record video, this would be much better for video.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have more space for that. But yeah, we actually got a message that we wanted to lead with.
Yes. Do you have her message pulled up?
Patty,
I just want you to know that it completely made my day to hear from you. We don't often hear from listeners. We have one who messages us a lot named Denise, and we love Denise in Brazil. But Patty, we were so happy to hear from you, and it just edified us and it encouraged us. So thank you for taking time to do that. We did chat about your interpretations, and we would love to respond.
Yeah, so real quick, what was the point that she made in her message?
when I read Genesis 25:20 through 21, Isaac was 40 years old when he was married. In verse 21, he prayed for Rebekah's barrenness, and the Lord granted his prayer. At the end of verse 26, Isaac was 60 years old when she bore the twins. I'm not sure how old Isaac was when he prayed for the kids, but from Genesis 25:20 to 25:26, that's 20 years. Abraham waited 25 years for Isaac. Isaac maybe waited 20 years for Jacob and Esau, assuming he asked God for kids when he was 40. So that's the bulk of the email or text.
Yeah, so Patty, really appreciate your message, and I think there's a very good point that you're making in there, which is that Isaac did have to wait a while in order to have his children as well. The point we were making as well is that he did not have to wait as long as Abraham did. And when you think about it, Abraham got his child when he was 100. He was probably trying with Sarah for a very long time before that. Yes, we're shown 25 years of waiting, but he didn't start having children or trying to have children at the age of 75. He was likely trying ever since he married his wife, Sarah. So the trying there was a very long time period for him, and it wasn't until much later in his life that he was told by God he would have offspring when it was in his twilight years, and it wasn't until 25 years after that promise was finally fulfilled. For Isaac, it's comparatively a lot shorter. And you're right, we don't actually know when Isaac prayed, but contextually, the two verses are together, and from Jewish tradition and the interpretation of these verses, it's assumed that very quickly after Isaac prays for his wife that she becomes pregnant. So he still did wait a while after his marriage to Rebekah to pray this prayer, even if we assume that tradition is correct. So 25 years later, they're still not having children, and then he prays and then she gets pregnant, or he prays at the beginning and nothing happens for 25 years and then eventually she gets pregnant. I don't know that I would buy into that interpretation. It seems difficult to make that gel with the two verses being back to back there. He prays, and then immediately in the next verse, his wife is pregnant. But I think your point is still well made, that Isaac still had to wait.
And the word barren for Rebekah and for Sarah implies a certain amount of trying before you figure out that you can't conceive. And so Isaac did have to wait and did have to suffer through barrenness with his wife. And that does span years of time for most couples. In modern times, a woman is not considered infertile until she has, I think, attempted to get pregnant for a year unsuccessfully, and then diagnostics can be done. And a lot of the women that I know personally dealing with infertility have been waiting 3 to 5 to 8 years with no hope in sight. So it is a process to identify a woman as being barren. And that is where I think a lot of the time for Isaac and Rebekah came into play in order for him to know he needed to pray for her.
And I think the big thing that we were focusing on is the response from God seems to be very immediate. Not that there was no waiting, but that the response from God to Isaac's prayer does seem to be immediate, as is indicated by the fact that the back-to-back verses are there. He prays, and then she's able to conceive.
Either way, waiting on a baby is painful.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Patty, for reaching out. We hope to hear from you soon. Just our listeners know, if you do want to reach out to us, the best way to do it is on Instagram or by email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. So yeah, reach out to us because we love hearing from people. It totally makes our day.
And if you have a question or you think that we may have gotten something wrong, please let us know and we'll gladly address it.
We know that 2,000 people are listening every month, so we would really like to connect.
My goodness.
And we do get stuff wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. We are not in any stretch of the word scholars.
Don't
I'm not a
take our
scholar.
word for anything.
That's our tagline. Don't take our word for it. So don't.
Good job, Patty.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Patty. So we are now in Genesis chapter 27.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I have an announcement to
Oh,
make.
that's right.
We're 5 episodes away from our 100th episode.
Woo woo.
Do you know what that means?
A giveaway?
I've been holding on to a very special Bible and other amazing gifts for 4 months. Really excited to do this giveaway. If you are interested in this giveaway, our little bundle, I think, is worth over $500. And we are getting ready to announce that on social media. So if you are interested in entering this giveaway, we would love to hear from you and connect with you on social media. And you can follow us on Instagram. That's where everything is going to be announced.
Yeah, look forward to it.
And our website too, at thelogicofgod.com. Did I get that right?
Yep.
It's thelogicofgod.com. All right, so now we are in Genesis chapter 27. And this is one of the more controversial passages involving the patriarchs.
Deceit and lying in the Bible? What?
Conduct unbecoming of a patriarch, seemingly.
And he's the chosen one?
Mm-hmm. Jacob I loved, Esau I've hated.
Oh,
Oof.
we had to go there.
Yep.
So we enter into Genesis 27, hearing about Isaac being old, and his vision seems to have faded. And he calls to Esau and he says, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." He said, "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food, such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die."
So already there are a couple details in the story that are sticking out. One, going off of what you had talked about before, Cody, in our last episode, Isaac is trying to do like a covenantal meal with Esau, and after this covenantal meal, he's going to bless him. It's true that Esau has already given up his birthright, but he hasn't given up the blessing of the firstborn. And usually, according to Jewish tradition, those two things come together. The firstborn gets the blessing of the firstborn, but also they get the birthright. So he still has the blessing, and the blessing is pretty important. And Esau seems to put a lot of emphasis on this blessing as well. In fact, when he loses it later in this chapter, which we will get to, he's beside himself. But there's some interesting details in this, in what Isaac is requesting for this covenantal meal. For one, he's requesting wild game. Targum Onkelos actually interprets this as deer, though that's not specifically said in the original Hebrew. But he is asking for hunting wild animal, and he's not asking for a goat or a sheep from their flock. So he's presumably asking for a non-consecrated animal for this covenantal meal. Also, it seems like he's talking about blessing from himself, whereas Rebecca kind of changes the wording and says it's from God.
Yeah, so what is a blessing and what is a birthright? How are they different?
Yeah, so traditionally, blessing is like a double portion. So if there's 2 kids, like in Jacob and Esau, the firstborn would get 2/3 of the birthright and portion, and then the other son would get 1/3. So like it's a double portion of material goods. The blessing, on the other hand, is more a trajectory of their life. You know, how some people believe in like horoscopes and stuff like that. If you're a certain horoscope, you're going to be the greatest leader ever. But the blessing would be passing that affirmation and, in Isaac's case, the dwelling on of the Holy Spirit to the next son.
It's difficult because definitely as modern evangelicals, but also just in the modern church generally, we don't have a very high view of blessings. It's just seen as kind of like words.
You have my blessing.
Yeah, you have my blessing.
Be blessed.
Yeah, be blessed. Or you pray for someone. Like that's kind of how we see it.
Oh, Lord God, bless my husband.
Yeah, in the A&E, like this was a big deal, like very big deal. And it is this covenantal mindset of he's making this covenant with the firstborn of passing on his inner being. Like he uses the word soul here, like his person to his life force to the next in line. And that's what these these blessings were.
Yeah, it's important to shift our understanding here. That it's tough because blessings are seen generally as just words, that we're just talking to somebody. We're saying that something is going to happen. But Isaac is a prophet. And thus, when he's speaking, he's not speaking with his own authority. He's giving something that presumably God has given him. In modern times, if we're giving a blessing, we're just praying for someone and hoping something happens. Or if you're being blessed in a more official capacity by a priest or a bishop in one of the more mainline denominations, they may give an older blessing. A prayer of blessing that's been pre-established, that's a tradition that's been passed on from generation to generation. But that's not what Isaac is doing. He's giving something brand spanking new. This is not something that was given in the same way by Abraham to him. This is something unique that he is given, but is also being given by God, as Rebecca points out. This is the power of God resting on someone and working through someone to be made manifest on someone else. Like basically God is working through Isaac to bless one of his children. And there's some questions about this because it seems like Jacob stole it, right?
Very deceitful guy.
Is it deceitful when God told Rebecca during her pregnancy that this was going to happen?
Yeah, I would say this is not deceitful. And I would say that Rebecca is the one who's acting honestly here because she knows that the prophecy that was given by God to them is that the older will serve the younger, that Jacob is the one who is supposed to get the blessing, and Isaac is in some small way rebelling against God by trying to enact his own will.
Yeah, but come on, like Ishmael and Esau were like the underdogs. They're like the runts of the litter, except not the runts because they were big, hairy men. Everybody loves an underdog.
I see Isaac trying to take his view of who is going to be best for my clan moving forward. At this time, like battle and the roughness of life was very prevalent. So you would need somebody who is very strong and able-bodied, like Esau, the doer. He could do all of it. And I think that's why he asks for this. The game here is Esau could kill it. He could prepare it, and he could do it the nose to tail type mentality. He could do it all. And you have Jacob presented as an effeminate man later. He's got a smooth neck and smooth hands and was not good at hunting. So I see Isaac trying to play on what is going to be best for the future of the clan rather than the promise of God.
Maybe, but I also see a father that we know played favorites with his sons, who loved his son Esau and felt closer to him than he did with Jacob. And so it could have been strategic, but I also think it was emotional. I think Isaac is somewhat of a man of passions, but Esau is exceptionally a man of passions. We see that with him marrying not one, but two Hittite women. We see that in the birthright stew situation where he's being a little drama queen and saying that if he doesn't eat, he's going to die, and just callously, flippantly giving up his birthright. So we know that there is this kind of like overly dramatic, emotional, passionate side of Esau. And I think Isaac is probably playing into that a little bit here.
Definitely could be. Yeah, I see a lot of parallels to Ishmael and Esau. They're both described as skilled hunters or bowmen. They're both men of the field or men of wilderness. And something that, bear with me, maybe the biblical author was establishing how they were unfit to lead. So both Ishmael and Esau were described as, what is Esau?
Wild donkeys of men.
So wild donkeys of men, or he lived in the wilderness as Ishmael, and a man of the field is Esau. So is the biblical author connecting back to the Eden motif of the wilderness being this chaotic place, or the wilderness where Jesus was tempted, where the Israelites were exiled to? Is this describing them as a person of being full of temptation and desire, full of chaos, and that is why they're unfit to lead the covenantal line forward?
It's curious that you bring that up, because Rebecca overhears this discussion that Isaac has with Esau, and her response, Genesis chapter 27, starting at verse 5, "Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau had left for the open country to hunt game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, 'Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully to what I tell you to do. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies.'" The 2 goats, I think, is really interesting. And Cody, I saw in the outline that you noticed this as well. And it's also very interesting when you compare the 2 sons together. One staying in the tents and being a man of learning, and the other being a man going out into the wilderness. And that seems like a repeated motif, because it seems like it's making a connection between the scapegoat.
Yeah, so this one stood out to me just because the meat of choice here is 2 goats. And if they're feeding Isaac, like if this is for Isaac and Jacob, the covenantal meal between the 2, why do they need 2 goats? That's a lot of meat. So there is this priest mentality of Rebecca here. She's the one who goes and slaughters.
Wait, a female priest?
Yeah, this isn't new. Eve was a female priest.
Ruffle the feathers.
Deborah, also keep in mind, Deborah was a prophetess who led Israel. This is not something that's unheard of in the Bible.
No, and she's not going into the Holy of Holies and all of that stuff, and we don't need to get into the male-female debate, but she is precursoring the sacrificial system in Leviticus 16 here of sacrificing 2 goats. Generally, the scapegoat was not killed, but it did wear the sins of the nation as covering.
Real quick, let's explain what we're talking about, because I'm sure there are people who are hearing the term scapegoat, and I've heard that idiom before, but what does that have to do with the Bible? So what are we talking about with the scapegoat?
So scapegoat during, what is it, Pashka?
I don't know, scholar. You tell me.
I can't remember right now. So when once a year, every year, they would sacrifice a goat, and then the sins basically that Israel had accumulated over the year would be placed onto a goat that was not killed. It was sent out to the wilderness to Azazel.
Yeah, so it's important to stress there were 2 goats that were selected for this ceremony. One would be sacrificed to the Lord, and one would have the sins of the Israelites ceremonially put on it, and then it would go off into the desert to Azazel, like you said. 2
What's
goats.
Azazel?
The devil.
The devil, the wilderness demon, at the very least.
There are some people who argue that it's not the devil and that Azazel actually means hairy goat demon or something like that. It means God is mighty. So that's a weird name to put on the wilderness or a mountain goat.
Was this a practice? Because I'm thinking about listeners who don't understand the context of what we're talking about. So is this something that was a practice by God-fearing people, or was this a pagan practice?
This was by Israel. This was the covenantal system set up by Moses for the Levitical priesthood in Leviticus 16. This was to be done every year as a remembrance and as a purifying of the nation.
So I don't think it's a coincidence that Rebecca decided to use 2 goats here. And also what's interesting is, as a part of the scheme, after slaughtering the goats, because Jacob and Esau are very different, and Esau is very hairy. Jacob is covered in the skins of the goats.
Yeah, and the skins covering Jacob here are ultimately what gives him the blessing, and we could probably read on real quick. So all of this has been prepared. Rebecca has slaughtered it. They've put the excess skin of the goat on Jacob. It mentions his very smooth baby-like neck and hands. So he is wearing these to emulate how hairy Esau was. So in verse 18, so he went to his father and said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Now sit up and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me." But Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son?" He answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come near, that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not." So Jacob went near to Isaac his father, who felt him and said, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother's hands. So he blessed him. So here you have Jacob wearing this sacrifice on him, a covering, granting him access to be represented as something that he is not. So there is massive connections to substitutionary atonement here. And
You put some quotes.
yeah, I was very happy because I thought this was original to me, but apparently it is not. So Jacob wears another's identity to receive a blessing he didn't merit. This echoes sacrificial substitution, where an animal dies in the place of a sinner. So Origen, in homilies on Genesis, said Jacob did not come in his own skin, but in that of another, and thus received the blessing. In the same way, Christ takes upon himself the form of a servant, the skin of a sinner, and receives the inheritance for our sake.
Boom.
Bam. That if that doesn't just wrench your gut of just appreciation for what Jesus did for us, then I don't know what does. But if you don't like Origen, you reject him as a heretic. This is Saint Augustine.
The hippo himself.
The hippo. So this is in City of God. In the very deceit of Jacob, there was a mystery. He took upon himself the person of another, just as Christ took the form of a sinner, though without sin, that he might reconcile us to the Father.
This begs an interesting question. Is deception in the name of God's will or salvation deception? Or do we allow ourselves to be fooled to further our own agenda of self-serving or sin?
So there are times in the Bible where people lie, but they lie for a good reason, and it's not generally said that they're wrong. When the spies go into Jericho, they're spies. They don't go around telling everybody that they're Hebrews.
Yeah, but then you have Jacob here, and he's like, the Lord, your God, granted me success.
Lord, I'm Esau. Lord granted me success in the field or forest.
Wilderness.
Bless me.
And it's weird, and I think this goes into something you were saying earlier, Gina, is like Isaac smells that this is fishy from the very beginning, but goes with it. And like Jewish tradition here is like the earthly part of Isaac wanted Esau, but the spiritual part of Isaac knew Jacob was God's choice. So spiritually he was good, but materially he was not.
You see both sons in the father and Abraham's legacy ultimately being chosen. Like Isaac's name means laughter, and we know that he tricked Abimelech into believing that Rebecca was his sister, but then they got found out because they were laughing playfully together. Isaac seems to be a playful person, even just based on the meaning of his name. And so I imagine that he's, okay, you caught me.
All the same, there is the commandment, thou shalt not lie. Now, we can wiggle around that, saying there are times where people are in war or whatever, but this is Jacob lying to get a blessing that was not intended for him by Isaac. Is it right that he lied? I don't know if it's right exactly. However, if we're looking at the context here, one, Isaac knew Jacob was the one who was supposed to get the blessing. Rebekah knew this as well. There'd been a prophecy and everything. Like, they knew it. Isaac is effectively acting in rebellion against God, and Rebekah is trying to get everything back on track. Now, is there an honest way they could have done this? Probably.
But not in a way that wouldn't have caused Esau to become angry. Because if Esau had been given the blessing, then Abraham's covenant would never have come to fulfillment. There had to be the right fit for this covenantal blessing. And Esau wasn't it. And we knew that from the very beginning of their lives based on the way the Bible describes them. Like, whether he got tricked or not, Esau was not fit. Esau would have been the one that suffered. And ultimately he still did. But at least this way, he couldn't blame his father.
I think there's this flow, this string that God has planned, and it works great for everybody when you fall into his will. And we're not Calvinists here. We believe you can deviate from God's will. And I think this is still a deviation from that. And I think when we cover the rest of Genesis, like, the deceit comes back and bites Jacob in the butt. Because Laban, what is Laban to him? His uncle? His uncle. So he deceives Jacob in a similar way. Like, it is not...
Just like Abraham was held accountable and had to pray and all of that for the fertility of the people in Abimelech's land.
Yeah, it seems that God has, if not a sense of humor, a sense of propriety, where people are constantly confronted by either the thing that they're pursuing or the sins that they've done. In this case, Jacob has acted deceptively. Now, he acted deceptively to get something that was promised to him by God, but he acted deceptively nonetheless, and as a result, he had to struggle with deception and himself had to deploy trickery in the future to get the things that he wants, and that causes more conflict for him down the line. What's more, I do think I agree with you, Cody. There was probably a way to do this for all parties involved. All parties involved are doing things that are not quite right. Rebekah and Jacob are more in the right, I would argue, than Isaac, because Isaac is the one trying to bear God's name falsely, trying to attribute God's blessing to someone it's not meant for, which is, I would argue, a much worse offense. But still, it wasn't right to try to take it. And I think that's why, one, he is confronted with so many other deceivers in his future, but also why ultimately he wrestles God. He is wrestling with God. And it is only then that God directly blesses him. And that's when he becomes Israel. He becomes a new man.
Yeah, so there's a lot that doesn't go right for Jacob here that I don't think people talk about. Jacob doesn't get the birthright that was legally his. Like, he had traded that was a legal binding covenantal meal. That was his. He has to directly flee after this because of how mad Esau is. He doesn't get the land inheritance. He doesn't get the herds and wealth from Isaac. So he basically traded the blessing for the birthright in this instance because Esau inherits that. Ultimately, like, Esau makes a great name for himself and has all of these herds and flocks when they meet again. And assumingly that's from Isaac's household because Jacob builds his own from Laban. So he trades this birthright, which was legally his, for the blessing. And then this idea of I don't think he was ready yet either. Like, we have all throughout scripture this idea of delayed kingship. And the unlikely leaders have to go into developmental phases. Like, you see it with Jacob here. You see it with Moses wandering for 40 years, building his character before he actually takes over leading Israel out of Egypt. You see it with David. He's anointed way before he actually takes over the kingship from Saul. And then, like, even Jesus as a human, like, he grew in favor of man. Like, he was developed as well.
And he kept saying, my time has not yet come.
Yeah, and he had to go out for 40 days in the desert and be tempted. And this isn't to detract from his deity or divinity, but it is to highlight his humanity and going through the steps of developing fully before taking on what he had to take on.
Yeah, Christ is not only the lamb that was slain. He's not only the scapegoat. He's not only the one who bore our sins into hell and bore them on himself for our sake. He's also meant to be our example. That's why we say he's both fully God and fully man. He is fully God in that only God could forgive sin. But he's also fully man in that he suffered as we suffered, and yet he bore our suffering in the way we ought to. Every time he was faced with a difficulty or a hunger or anything like that, he responded in the godly way that we all should. And in that way, he lived as our example.
Absolutely. Amen.
So you're right. I do think that there are a lot of details that we tend to miss. We tend to treat Jacob as just some kind of deceptive guy who eventually becomes Israel, who eventually becomes a man who is worthy. And in some ways, yes, he does grow into that, but he does constantly show that what you talked about, that delaying of kingship and this willingness to sacrifice. He gives up the material offering or the material guarantees of the birthright for the blessing, which is superior, but not to someone who is temporally minded. Like we said, modern day, you hear about a blessing. Which would you rather have? Would you rather have $1 billion or some old dude tell you that you're going to be? Yeah, I approve. Everything the light touches.
Remember.
Yeah, but like in this, Jacob doesn't get, like, he basically goes and becomes a farmhand, like, for 14 years.
Basically working for free for those 14. He doesn't really start to earn a living until after he gets his 2 wives. And only one of those he wants.
And like even that, like he seems to be fine, and we're jumping way ahead in the story, but like he seems to be fine working until he figures out that Laban's going to just continue to make him work because he's making Laban very wealthy. So he goes from having this massive wealth that Isaac's accumulated to being a farmhand.
Also, we mentioned in a previous episode that he was as crafty as a serpent. But that doesn't seem to continue for him. He softens as he ages.
Love softens him. But he's still crafty. What he does to grow his own wealth through Laban is crafty.
Yes, but interpersonally is less manipulative. He could have found a way to get his wife that he wanted sooner, but he didn't.
Yeah, and there's some human errors in there, like he was drunk and all of that stuff and was tricked and led into deceit himself.
I think all bad things are good things that have been corrupted. Craftiness is ultimately a corruption of intelligence and wisdom. It's a self-centered wisdom. It's figuring out how to twist things for your own benefit. And while Jacob does still retain wisdom and understanding, he uses it less and less for himself. And even then, in this initial stage where he is trying to twist things for his own benefit, it is ultimately with the kingdom of heaven in mind. He wants the blessing, he wants the immaterial, and he wants something that was promised to him. So I would say he does grow, but the craftiness is coming from something that is good, the wisdom and the intelligence. And I think that is the reason why he's chosen, for many reasons, over Esau. It's kind of like what you guys were talking about before, this idea of the wilderness, the wild man, the creature full of passions that's ruled by their stomach.
He just has to have 2 wives, 2 of the local women.
Oh, yeah, Jacob has 4 wives eventually.
Yes, but he marries the local Hittite women against his parents' blessing.
Yeah, and he tries to make up from that. This connection with Esau and Ishmael grows stronger because he marries an Ishmaelite after he realizes, oh, I don't like the Hittite women anymore. We'll learn about that next chapter, though.
I learned nothing.
So I wanted to bounce back a little and talk a little more about Rebecca as the priest. I feel like that bears a little bit more explanation. And I had a really good time looking into that myself.
Absolutely.
One of the things that really irritated me about my time at Moody, and I have good things to say about getting an education at Moody, I really do. But it was really difficult for me to take some of the classes about women's ministry that specifically looked at women's role in ministry and in the history of the church. It wasn't Moody's stance that upset me. It was the opinions of all of the men in the classes, because a majority of the men were very against women having any type of a voice in ministry leadership. And I really enjoy moments where women's dedication to righteousness shines in the Bible. And this is one of those examples. And so I really enjoyed looking into this a little bit more and just looking at the patterns for priesthood and seeing how Rebecca truly did align with the aspects of traditional priesthood in ancient Near East times. And this would be pre-Levitical law. It's not the formal examples of priesthood that are descendants of Aaron. This is more just like the precursor to that way of life. And like Cody and Ben mentioned before, it seems like some of the themes we're seeing here are repeated in Levitical law. And so did they learn something from Rebecca? I think there's good argument to believe they may have. And looking at ancient Near East priesthood, we have Melchizedek. He is a very formal, titled priest. He accepted a tithe. He led a city. He also was involved in battles. And then you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that are considered to be priestly by building altars, offering sacrifices. Priests were traditionally the firstborn in families. That was something that was interesting. And then in Malachi 2:7, the verse says, "For the lips of a priest should guard knowledge, and people should seek instruction from his mouth, for he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts." So what I'm seeing from Rebecca here is this guarding of knowledge. She's defending what she knows to be true from God in the prophecy that she was told of the twins in her womb. And it is in opposition to Isaac's plan to bless Esau. So she's really defending God's covenant with Abraham and the words that were spoken about her sons. And she's taking intercessory responsibility for any curse coming from the deception. So if you read in the verses, she tells Jacob, any curse that comes from this will be on me. So she's owning it and saying, whatever happens, it's my fault. And so she is leading by taking that responsibility. And then also at the end of this chapter, she says basically that if Jacob goes into his own free will and marries a Hittite woman, that her life's work would be meaningless.
Yeah, there's a lot about Rebecca that's really interesting here. First, I hate to keep going back to Onkelos, only I love going back to Onkelos, so I'm going to keep doing it. But in Targum Onkelos, in chapter 27, verse 13, talking about Rebecca and the curse that you mentioned, because Jacob is concerned about getting cursed if all of this comes to light. It says, "His mother said to him, 'Your curse shall be upon me. It was said regarding me in a prophecy that curses will not come upon you, my son. But listen to or accept me, go bring them to me.'" Now again, this is taking some commentarial liberties with the text. It's saying that she understood, based on the prophecy, that no curse would come. But even if a curse did come, it would be on her and not Jacob, and she was willing to take that. But it shows a level of understanding and initiative, but also courage.
And faith.
And faith, an enormous amount of faith. She effectively was having more faith in what God said than Isaac did. Now, God is still working through Isaac. God is giving the blessing through Isaac. But also, in many ways, he's giving it through Rebecca.
Yeah, this is where I think the connection so much with the priesthood of Rebecca, like her operating as a priest in this moment, like she's getting divine access from God, like she was given a vision, she was spoken to about Jacob by God directly, she is sacrificing animals on the behalf of Jacob, and then she is also protecting the covenantal line, which all of these things become Levitical priesthood law later on. Like you have the direct access to God as a Levitical priest. That's your responsibility. You have the responsibility of sacrificing for God. And you also have the responsibility and the law of not diluting the line of Israel and marrying outside of the tribe. She's protecting all of that.
She says she sees this as her life's work because in verse 46, she says, "If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?" This is the culmination of what she's waited for. She waited to get pregnant and have children, being barren. Then she waited to see what was going to happen between her children. And then she waited for Isaac to die. And this is all of the things that she's waited for, that God has told her about, that she's had to protect and remember for such a long time. And she's holding true to those things. That takes a lot of strength of character that most of us don't have. Cody and I have had promises from God spoken over us, and we're like a couple years out from that. And it's very hard to hold on to faith and hope for those that they're ever going to happen.
Yeah.
So imagine waiting decades like Rebecca here, and then,
These are the stories that like feed you to keep going on, though. The delayed kingship. And I'm not claiming I'm going to be a king or anything, but like I've heard from God, and I need to hold fast to that. It's not an instantaneous thing. Like when you hear from God, it's usually takes time. Like it doesn't seem like God works in instants very often. And
but I want him to.
I know. And it's not all the time either. Like you don't hear Rebecca say how she is constantly hearing from God about Jacob. She calls back to the moment that she heard that Jacob was going to lead out of these two.
We were talking a couple of days ago, and I was like, do you remember how many days we had to wait for Shiloh, our last baby? We waited exactly to the day she was born, 800 days. That's a long time. In the grand scheme of life, it's not that long, but 800 days felt like an eternity. Like, you have to wait. And she did. Rebecca waited. And I would argue probably didn't have the family life that she was expecting.
Probably not. And what's also interesting is that she's acting against the family dynamic that would be expected of her. And in fact, that is biblical. According to the Bible, the man is the head of the household. He is the decision maker. But the trouble is, what happens when the head of the house is making a decision against God?
Or even incapacitated. Like he was blind. He was dying. In all expectation, the firstborn son would have taken over at that point.
What's also interesting here, though, is that she's giving orders to Jacob, to the one chosen by God. She's the one telling him what to do. She's the one coming up with this plan.
And he's, I don't know.
But in the end, he still obeys. Ultimately, this isn't to go against what the Bible teaches about the men being the spiritual head of the household. I don't think this is preaching against that, but what it is saying is that ultimately God is the head of all things. Our authority, whether man or woman, comes from God. And if you act against God, it is your responsibility to try to get things on track in the right way if you can. And to be fair, it should always be done in the right way. But Rebecca sees something that's being done against God. She and Isaac both heard the prophecy. Isaac is going against it, and Rebecca says that will not stand.
And she acknowledges at the very end of this chapter that if her son Jacob chooses to go outside of God's plan, and he can, then it's all for nothing. If that doesn't tell you about free will, I don't know what does. Go there.
And I think the scripture here shows that at least Isaac realizes he's in the wrong, because one, when Esau comes back in, he's, no, I got no more blessing for you, and almost gives him a curse. But right after Esau gets super frustrated and talks about killing Jacob,
he's comforting himself by plotting his brother's death. That's Rebecca's words.
We've all been there. Come on.
But they realize this. Isaac realizes this. Jacob realizes this. And it seems like Isaac's pretty over it already and blesses Jacob again as he leaves.
For he has cheated me these two times.
So the very beginning of 28, I thought it was in 27. My apologies. But right after, when Jacob is sent off to Laban, like Isaac called Jacob, blessed him, and directed him out. Like he seems to be over it.
In some ways, that seems to be almost an apology, because he's blessing him again. He's not saying, oh, you stupid kid, you stole the blessing from the one I love. No, he's blessing him again.
Esau in chapter 27 and verse 33 through 40-ish, Esau's like whining about it. And Isaac's, it is what it is.
Yeah, and the blessing that Esau gets is, your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. It's
That
not,
doesn't sound like a blessing.
and it puts into context what Isaac had wanted to give to Esau and the yoke that he was about to put on Jacob and was not planning on giving him a way out. But at the same time, it's not nothing. It's something. But I think this builds further on the idea that a blessing can't be given by a person, it can only be given by God. And this doesn't sound like the type of blessing that Isaac would give Esau if he could give him any other blessing. This does seem like a concession of sorts. Like this is God letting both Isaac and Esau know that Jacob really is the one who's going to lead the way forward. And eventually Esau may break away, but it's not going to be the way he hopes it will be.
Very interesting. So what about the kiss? You've got point 6, the kiss, no notes. Is this where he smells him and he's, oh, my son?
So this is 27, starting in verse 26. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to kiss him and kissed him. And when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mothers bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed."
So this stood out to me because I was in this mindset of substitutionary atonement, and the other kiss that stuck out to me was Judas. So you have this idea of Jacob coming in deceitfully to take away something that is not his, and he gets it because he's covered by Jesus. Judas rejected that covering, and his kiss ultimately led to destruction, where Jacob's led to blessing because he was covered.
And yet, still at the same time, Judas's betrayal did lead to the blessing for the rest of mankind. But it was only through Christ's sacrifice, through that kiss, that we ended up being covered. I think this is an example, both of them are examples of God taking something that someone intended for bad, but using it for good.
So we've talked a lot about this chapter so far, but then at the very end, we have our chiasm on marriage again.
Yeah, you read it already. Read it again.
Verse 46. Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?"
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about the chiasm of the stews, the covenantal meals being wedged in where they don't fit. But there's also this theme of, at the end of the past 3 chapters, of weird marriages, or marriages in general, popping back up. You have the lineage of Rebecca popping up.
Where she was born at the end of the chapter, which felt really out of place.
Very out of place. Then you have Esau marrying 2 Hittite women at the end of the last chapter. And now, again, at the end of this chapter, 27, we also see again a weird marriage thing. So these stick out, and I think they're chiastic in nature and point again towards this following the covenantal plan, and a precursor to what Israel is called to is staying within a sanctioned marriage, not marrying the Canaanite culture, the Hittite culture, that area, because it is so corrupted. And you have it. I think we miss it today, because usually marriages now, you come together and you become one religion or one household, and you take true to that. The man leaves the father and mother, and the 2 become one flesh, and that's basically everything becomes one. But that the A&E was not like that, especially with the Hittite culture and the Canaanite culture, all of that. You have the religion divided in a household was very common. And you actually see this in the story of Rachel, where she steals Laban's idols. So it was very custom for the women to take the gods of their fathers and still continue worshiping those, even if the head of the household worshiped a different god. So that's one of the reasons why the Hittite marriages are so bad, because they brought in their idols. They brought in the geographical gods of those areas into the marriage and worshiped them.
And there's a very interesting contrast with that with Ruth, who's a Moabite. And presumably a very similar option was given to her, the idea that she would have followed the Moabite religion and taken the Moabite faith. But she says to Naomi, I will go where you will go, and your God will be my God. She's not bound to this woman by blood, and she's not bound to her by marriage anymore, because the point connecting the two of them is gone. But she chooses to worship God and stay with a woman that there's no reason to do. And as a result, she is incorporated into this bloodline, this lineage that produces the Messiah. First David, and then eventually the Messiah. So yeah, it didn't mean that it would be impossible to find a woman, but yes, the culture made it very difficult to find a righteous woman amongst the non-believing women of the Philistines and the Hittites.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like, okay, yes, they're from they're from Ur, they're from that area. Like they still the lineage, the patriarchal Jacob, Isaac, Abraham are not really that much different from the common people, but it is much easier to say, you are from my lineage, this is what we believe. You're worshiping the wrong gods, versus these Hittite people have no connection at all. So converting them would be much more difficult.
Friendly reminder to check out our 100th episode giveaway on our website, thelogicofgod.com, or Instagram.
Yeah, and if you're not following us on Facebook or Instagram or subscribed, please do.
Yes, because we give a lot of free stuff away, and we have a lot of strategic partnerships with different places to help you gain access to biblical literacy tools that we use all the time, that we encourage you to start using so that you don't have to take our word for it. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.